You're listening to The Corbett Report. CorbettReport.com.
Who are we? Where did we come from? What are we doing here? The big questions that humanity has been asking for a very long time. And, well, lo and behold, the Hollywood programming masters have come along with an answer in recent years that we are descended from aliens, apparently, that have come from the sky. And the signs of this are everywhere, according to them. Well, that's the latest meme that's being propagated in the predictive programming media these days. But tonight we are going to be breaking down that idea and where it comes from and what's really behind it. So I hope you're strapped in for tonight's conversation. We have a doozy lined up for you. Once again, I'm James Corbett of CorbettReport.com, coming to you as always from the sunny climes of Western Japan, where it is already the 16th of October, 2012. Tonight we're joined on the line all the way from Nashville, Tennessee by our guest Chris White, who is, well, I think probably well known to a lot of the listeners out there. He's done a lot of documentaries, debunkumentaries as they've become known, on all sorts of figures out there, David Icke and Jordan Maxwell, Michael Tsarian, the Zeitgeist movement, and the latest one is on Ancient Aliens, the history series that has been garnering a lot of attention for a number of years now. Well, now there is Ancient Aliens Debunked at ancientaliensdebunked.com. It's a very detailed, very lengthy, very documented breakdown of the lies and misinformation that's being propagated by the Ancient Aliens, and it's I think an excellent work. I highly recommend it. It's completely freely available in video and also in transcript form. All the links are there. It's a great resource, ancientaliensdebunked.com. So let's bring him on the program. We have Chris White on the line. Chris, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Hey, James, what's up? Thanks for having me on the show. It's a real pleasure to be on the show. You do great work for the truth world here, and I just really appreciate you. And that was a great intro, too. That was all in one take. You're just you're natural.
Yeah, no second take on live radio, I'm afraid. Well, absolutely. Let's. I think you and I have a lot of correspondence in our work. I think we're both very analytical people, and that comes through in your work very clearly. You take a lot of time documenting what you're talking about and doing it very clearly. So my hat's off to you for your work. But before we get into that, we just have a couple of minutes here in the first segment. So why don't we talk a little bit about yourself, where you come from, what motivates your work, and where people can find it?
Sure. Well, I think just like a lot of people, I got started in this, just as a just run-of-the-mill truther, I guess. I mean, it was about 1999 or something like that that I found. I think it was David Icke's book. It was Sitchin and David Icke right around the same time that I found. And so Sitchin kind of gave me the ancient astronaut theory, and that kind of opened my mind to a whole lot of other things. And so David Icke, with his book The Biggest Secret, somewhere around there as well, that opened my eyes to a lot of different things as far as the conspiracy world went. And then after 9/11, and the rest is history. So that was my main thing. Just trying to figure out what the truth about all this was, as we're also familiar with what that process is like, and that those first few years of tumbling down the rabbit hole. So that's what I did. But there were just a few different things that bugged me along the way. One of those was some of the stuff that Sitchin had said and some of the stuff that Icke had said. And those just really gnawed at me for a long time. And just bit by bit, I would find things that didn't add up. So it really culminated around the time of Zeitgeist, because just before Zeitgeist came out, I had been doing some research about something that David Icke had said about how all the different pagan deities were predecessors of Jesus Christ. So I totally believed that, but I just recently found out from before the movie came out that it was wrong, that it was like a 100-year-old theory that was easily proven wrong. And when it came out, I tried to tell everybody, I was like, hey guys, we're all believing this, but we shouldn't, because it's not true. And I just became like Mr. conspiracy world pariah there. And so it's really, been that way.
Up that great theory with some facts. But
you know what? But as a lot of it was a lot. That's been my motivation solely. I know a lot of people put a lot of different motivations on the stuff that I do, but it's mostly just trying to say, hey, let's not believe the stuff that's wrong. If we're trying to get to the bottom of all this stuff,
if we're
there's
the
a lot of
movement. We have to follow the truth. Exactly. Let's take a short break. We'll be right back with Chris White after this. All right, friends, welcome back to the program. Welcome back to Corbett Report Radio. This is James Corbett of CorbettReport.com, and tonight we're talking to Chris White, the documentary filmmaker behind the just-released documentary Ancient Aliens Debunked, going into the truth behind the claims that are being promoted and promulgated by the History Channel in their Ancient Aliens series. So I know that this is getting a lot of attention already. It hasn't been out that long, but it's already getting quite a response. Chris, tell us a little bit about the response you're getting to this documentary.
Well, it's been really big so far. I think it's in the first 2 weeks, it's nearing on almost 250,000 just from the ones I have uploaded on my channels, which is pretty good for me. But it's one of these issues that everybody kind of has a stake in somehow or another because of the History Channel's propagation of it. A lot of the mainstream world is interested to one degree or another. You know, that with the meme stuff, I mean, and even the people that believe in the ancient astronaut theory are interested in it. So it's something that I think a lot of people would watch if they could see a link. And I think it's been shared real well with the social media and stuff like that. But I think partially too due to this huge nature of how this has been sold to the general public in video games and movies and books and whatever else. It's been a big people believe it, and so people respond to it one way or the other.
It's touching the zeitgeist, if you'll pardon the pun. But absolutely right. I think this is definitely a subject that's ripe for debunking because it is so far out there in the public consciousness right now, and there's a lot of stuff that's being spread around about it. So there's a lot of public interest in this, and that's why obviously it is touching such a chord with a lot of people. A lot of people are tuning in to see it. It doesn't mean that everyone agrees with your documentary. Everyone's happy about it, but certainly it's getting a lot of attention, and sometimes from some strange bedfellows like Michael Shermer, I understand, has been promoting your work, despite the fact that obviously you two have some disagreements on religious matters. But Michael Shermer has been promoting this documentary. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, that was he was a pretty cool guy in the sense that he wrote me and he said he really liked it, and he said it was he just complimented it, and he said he wanted to post it on the site, and then he also asked if I would write an article for the magazine, and I felt really honored because I do think that he's a great debunker, and I wanted to make sure because I knew that the reaction that this would get from the skeptic community, and so I told him, hey, look, because to clear that up, one of the reasons is a lot of people, because I'm a Christian, people have been saying, oh, a Christian is debunking this, it's worthless and everything else, and especially from the skeptic community. And I warned him, I said, people are going to be really angry about it, so I understand if you want to back out. I know it's not quite obvious in the film or whatever. But to his credit, he said it didn't matter to him, and it was all the same. So he posted it, and indeed there was a lot of blowback from that. There's just huge conversations in the skeptic community about why should we even listen to this guy? I'm mad that we're even considering watching this thing, and this guy's a Christian, and so
facts aren't facts if they're spouted by someone with a different belief than me. Yeah, interesting how that works. Well, okay, for people who don't really know what we're talking about, let's step back for a second and just set the table for the conversation. Let's tell them a little bit about the Ancient Aliens series and why you decided to make a documentary about it.
Well, the Ancient Aliens series is a television show on the History Channel that promulgates, or I've been overusing that word already, the ancient astronaut theory, which is the idea that aliens came to the Earth in the remote past, and they, in some versions, seeded mankind, whether by genetic manipulation or sometimes that's an issue. Other times it's just they built the monuments of the past, such as the pyramids, or they gave us technology to build those monuments, Baalbek and Lebanon. There's lots of different things like that. So it's basically ancient aliens came here in the past and did all kinds of cool stuff. And they have a lot of different areas which they use to prove this. And so what I did is essentially show that those things that they're presenting as evidence, I'm not saying this is just wrong just because it's said, but the things that they promote as their evidence for it is wrong, and it's provably wrong. And if they want us to believe it, or if it should be believed, it needs to be done using different evidence. And so I was really intent to make sure that this was documented with things that people could find out for themselves. One of my goals for this and a lot of the different things was to get people to start thinking in terms of epistemology. How do we know what we know? And to get people to start researching in that way, to know what they're looking at. Okay, this person went here, he saw this, he documented this, and you can be reasonably sure that that's accurate. And so that was one of my goals, is to try to encourage that idea among truth seekers.
And I think you succeed admirably in that goal, because what comes across to me as a viewer of this documentary is that you are very much committed to not to ridiculing the ideas, but examining the evidence and finding out whether or not it stands up to the light of reason. And I think you do an excellent job of that. I think there's a lot of very specific examples of that. And I think it would do a disservice to the documentary itself to get too much into the specific examples that you go through in the documentary. Obviously, people who are interested should go to ancientaliensdebunked.com, where they can watch it all for free and see all the sources there directly. But perhaps we can talk about one or two of the examples of things that are presented as evidence for this ancient alien contact that you debunk in this documentary. And one that I found particularly interesting, I'm going to go out on a limb and admit that I have never seen the Ancient Aliens series itself. My only exposure to it is through your documentary. I'm, of course, familiar with the ideas and the themes and broadly speaking, what it's about, but I've never actually... I'm pretty off the grid when it comes to that type of pop culture conditioning, thankfully. But so some of this I was hearing really for the first time, and through your debunking of them, and they were quite interesting, and I could definitely see how it's all in the editing and what facts they leave out and what they choose to show you, what they choose not to show you. It's the way that they can construct their argument. And one that I found interesting in that regard was the Tolima fighter jets, which I'd never heard of before. Tell us a little bit about that and how it's presented in the series.
Right. These things are little gold figurines that are found in Colombia, and they are about 1,000-something years old or something like that. And they are funerary objects. They were found in a tomb. There was like 100 of these things, and they were all really highly stylized animals, like frogs and bats and lots of different types of fish and things like that. But there was about 7 to 10 of them that looked like airplanes or fighter jets, is where I got the name, the fighter jets there. And there are just a great deal of logical problems with that, namely that they, in comparison to the other objects, which are highly stylized, they have eyes and teeth and fins and these types of things, or at least eyes and teeth. The other 90% of them, and these 10 do as well, it stands to reason that they are also highly stylized figurines as well. But they do all kinds of interesting stuff. They essentially make a model airplane out of it, essentially to say, look, it flies there and it's aerodynamic, therefore it must be a plane. But that one really, I think, to see the images, I think, is really helpful with that one, because to see what they did, what the things that the Tolima did in addition to those, how stylized they were, it really just defeats itself the more images that you see, I think, on that one.
And what kind of a context did they provide that in the series? Did they show the other figurines in that series, or did they only show the ones that seemed to support their theory?
Right. Well, no, they did show them briefly. There is a brief clip of that. Their context is always self-serving. They are geniuses at writing and editing, at the music, the sound effects. I felt so inadequate as I was editing that, because I was, sitting next to these just brilliant clips of mind control. But no, the way I was thinking about that one actually today, the way that they presented that, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was a really clever thing. I was listening to an interview with Giorgio Tsoukalos about that, and so I don't have anything good to say, but yeah.
Well, suffice it to say, exactly right. They are masters of manipulation when you look at the ways that they use some of this footage and don't use others, etc. Well, how about anything that what did you not have time to include in this documentary? I know there was so much that material and resources that you were looking at. Was there anything that you left out for the purposes of just too much detail, too much time, can't cover everything?
Yeah, that was actually the biggest challenge in this whole thing is before I did, I spent maybe close to a year of research in this, and I actually had a lot of people on the podcast that I do that wanted to help research. So we would go through like all the episodes of Ancient Aliens and just catalog at what time signature they said what thing or whatever, and try to just kind of put together all the different issues. And then we got all the issues together, and then we kind of tried to research as much of those as we could. And there are just so many. I mean, we picked the most important one at the end of the day, the most important ones. But yeah, there's a lot of them. One thing that people have been asking me a lot about that I kind of wish I would have included is the Dogon or Sirius mystery. This also the face on Mars. I'll briefly talk about those. The Sirius mystery was this idea that the Dogon tribe in Africa knew about the star Sirius, which is a really bright star. It was a binary star that had another star as a part of that, which, as the story goes, that is something that they couldn't have known without, aliens telling them or whatnot. And so that one is really interesting. I wish I would have gone into it in more detail. Basically, the short version is that the book was based on the work of two anthropologists who went to this tribe, and instead of asking a whole lot of people, they asked this one guy. He was a blind guy. I don't know if that matters or not, but that's just how the story goes. And they got all this information from this one guy, and they took it back to England or wherever, where this story was really hot.
Okay, just hold on there. We're coming right up against the break, but we'll finish that story on the other side. Once again, we're talking to Chris White of AncientAliensDebunked.com. We'll be right back after these messages. All right, friends, welcome back to the broadcast. Once again, this is the Corbett Report. You are tuned into Corbett Report Radio here on Republic Broadcasting. Tonight we're talking to Chris White of the newly released documentary Ancient Aliens Debunked at AncientAliensDebunked.com. And just before the break, we were talking about the Dogon people of Mali, I believe, who somehow happened to know that Sirius was a binary star system. How did they know this? Well, clearly ancient alien contact. Or maybe not. So let's pick up the story from where you left off there. So some anthropologists went there to talk to these people about what they knew about this star system?
Sure. And this was the original guys that brought this story back. And they brought it back. They got their information from one guy. And at this, there's a lot of potential funny business that was going on there, but I won't go into that. But basically, England had just sort of, or the world had just sort of figured this out, that Sirius was a binary star, or however that worked. And so they were so surprised, hey, look, we just figured this out, but these people have also just figured it out, and how did they know, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, it wasn't until much later, the early 90s, that another anthropologist wanted to just go confirm it and go study them more. I mean, he was more or less wanting to just go do more work about it. His name was Van Beek, Walter Van Beek. He wrote a paper called The Dogon Restudied, a Field of Evaluation of the Work of Marcel, French names Griol, and anyway, the point of his paper was that it couldn't be confirmed. There were supposed to be 15% of these people were initiated into the priest class. They were supposed to know this stuff, and not only did they not know it, there wasn't any evidence that they ever did know it, even in a distant memory. And there's other issues. If you get into this issue, and you can do at the blog at ancientaliensdebunked.com/blog, this is one you can really dig into a lot. There's a lot of ups and downs, and the way that the information was presented in the book, The Sirius Mystery, was just disingenuous at best. So it's not just this issue. There's just tons of stuff going on wrong there. As I mentioned, also the pyramids and face on Mars, that's one that I wanted to get into just because I believed it. It was like one of the first things that I ever believed about the ancient astronaut theory. I mean, I saw those 1976 pictures of all that stuff, and I was like, well, that's all we need to know. There it is. So, but there have been new, really high resolution, 25 megabyte pictures that you can see of the face and the pyramids on Mars and stuff. The European Space Agency, you can have a link to that at the blog as well. And it's just obviously not true. It's just run-of-the-mill debris. I mean, and it doesn't really need much debunking. You just need to see those pictures if you haven't already. The idea of faking those is just, at that resolution, it just doesn't make any sense. and I've seen people try to overlay all kinds of geometries over the 1976 pictures and stuff like that. It's just something that it's wrong, and it's just clearly so. There was a few other things. One thing I wanted to talk about was crop circles, but even though Ancient Aliens, the series, talked about them, I just couldn't work it into being ancient, and I just figured, but actually I have been thinking, if in a perfect world, I'd like to do a documentary about crop circles and what I think they are, my theory, just try to determine if my theory is correct about that. It would require some some investigation into some stuff, but anyway, so I hope that answers the question.
So in the future, are you thinking of perhaps expanding the scope of what you're doing more sort of investigative work?
I really don't want to. That's the thing. I think that would be a great one to do, but and different stuff like this. My goal right now is to sort of stay the course with this project and to keep this going as far as the blog, and really start analyzing more of the theories that I haven't touched before, doing podcasts and stuff about it. I don't want to just leave it undone, because it's something that I want. It's so important. It needs to be there because of people like me when I first started. If I would have seen something like this, it would have saved me a whole world of just confusion. So I want to try to make it a place where people can go to sort of deprogram themselves from the just outright falseness of this particular theory. But no, I want to move on to different things. I just don't know what that is yet.
Well, very interesting. Well, certainly I'm glad that you have done this, because I think it is a valuable resource. And it starts to raise the question of really why we are seeing this idea being pushed so hard right now in all sorts of various forms of media and pop culture. Because I think anyone who's even vaguely aware of what's going on in the pop culture right now will know of this idea and how it's being pushed in various productions. And it does start to raise the question of why this is done. And I think with any charlatanry, there is, of course, the charlatans who will just take advantage and ride the coattails of any sort of meme or idea and try to profit from it. But there's also, I think, other ideas behind why this agenda is being pushed. So I'd like to start broaching that topic, but we're coming up against the next break. So first of all, let me open up the phone lines for anyone out there if you'd like to get in on this topic of ancient aliens. I know it's one that's touched a chord with a lot of the public. So if you have your own thoughts, questions, or opinions that you'd like to direct at Chris, 1-800-313-9443. That's 1-800-313-9443. That will get you up and on the air, or you can tweet me at Corbett Report, and I will get to your question on air here. So let's take a break, and we'll regroup our thoughts. Once again, we're talking to Chris White, and you can watch this documentary that we're talking about, Ancient Aliens Debunked, in its entirety, completely for free. All of the transcripts, resources, documents there linked up at ancientaliensdebunked.com. So a great resource, and of course that will also be linked up in the show notes for tonight's episode at corbettreport.com/radio. We're going to take another short break. When we come back, we'll start talking about why this meme is being pushed, where it's coming from, what the agenda is. So stay tuned right there. We'll be right back.
Introducing The Last Word DVD. For the first time on DVD, you can own all 7 episodes from the first season of the Last Word video series, including The Last Word on Terrorism.
You see, to Kissinger and the other adherents of the globalist ideology, terrorism is simply a word for any act that threatens the agenda of the globalists.
The Last Word on CCTV.
But there is something more fundamentally troubling about this entire CCTV surveillance grid than mere hucksterism.
The Last Word on Utopia.
The most pernicious evil always presents itself as something necessary, something transitory, a mere waypoint on the road to the land of milk and honey. In this way, the masses can be led to not only tolerate the most intolerable conditions, but actually to support those who would seek to rule over them.
And the Last Word on Independence.
It is a choice that we make each and every day to live in independence or in slavery. Every day is Independence Day.
The Last Word DVD. Buy your copy today at corbettreport.com.
All right, friends, welcome back to Corbett Report Radio. Once again, I'm your host, James Corbett of CorbettReport.com, coming to you as every night from Western Japan. And tonight we're talking to Chris White of AncientAliensDebunked.com. He also has his own podcasts and other material available at ConspiracyClothes.com. He's also on the Revelations Radio Network. He's got a lot of other work that we'll tell you about a bit later on in tonight's broadcast, but let's continue where we left off there, talking about this Ancient Aliens meme in totality, where it's come from, why it's being propounded so heavily right now. Of course, there are a lot of ideas floating around out there, but I think when we see so many different pieces of the pop culture puzzle coming together to promote a certain idea at a certain moment in time, it must be serving some sort of agenda. So that's really part of the question, the puzzle of why Ancient Aliens is such a hot topic these days. And I must admit myself, I recently went to see Prometheus, and yes, I'm a fan of the Aliens movies and Ridley Scott and all that, so I was looking forward to it. And because I have my critical thinker cap on, I certainly was not looking for enlightenment about where the human race came from or anything of that sort. So it is interesting to see the various ways that this is being pushed. But Chris, how about your own experience of this? What types of things do you see out there in pop culture that are corresponding to this meme or helping to push it, and where do you think this is coming from ultimately?
Well, obviously, the movie industry is huge. I mean, you mentioned Prometheus. Knowing recently was another one. Transformers, Thor, Stargate, Indiana Jones, Battlestar Galactica. I mean, TV shows, The X-Files, and video games, Halo, Assassin's Creed. We could just keep going. And if you wanted to just talk about aliens, not ancient aliens, we could do 50% of the movies that have, sci-fi movies that have come out have had that as a theme. So it's certainly, it could just be, hey, people are enjoying it. And that's certainly possible. But this has been going on for a long time. 2001: A Space Odyssey. But even before that, I tend to get a little more conspiratorial when I talk about motives of all this. I think I'm like you. I think it's too big. There's too much of this to just say it's all a coincidence and it's not benefiting anybody. But that's always where I would. That's always what confused me in all this research, is when I started to ask those kind of questions. Well, who would be benefiting in this? And I know that there are a lot of theories. One in just that you can have and kind of keep a consistent, not necessarily conspiratorial, or at least naturalistic version, is that, well, they're just trying to make us look off-world and not, focus on what's going on here and now, and that's certainly possible. But I think that it has the same kind of flavor as the kind of Zeitgeist stuff does. The Zeitgeist stuff is just as wrong as Ancient Aliens. You can see my website, zeitgeistchallenge.com, where I offer people $1,000 cash to just prove what Zeitgeist says. That's been up since the movie's been out. Haven't even had one serious submission yet. I've had a lot of people that would write and say, "Oh yeah, I'll do it. I know this is true." But anyway, my point is that it's like that in that I think people want it. If we're susceptible to lies if it has implications that we want, because then we don't really have any incentive to look at the other side of the story. And one thing that we've all learned by now is that you're not going to learn anything for real unless you really do look at both sides of the story. Like, you find the best guy on this side, and then you find the best guy on this side, and you really understand them both. And then, because if you listen to only one side of anything, you're not going to get it. I mean, if you just happen to be right, then that's fine. But you know what I'm saying? In research, you need to do that. And when a bias in terms of this is an issue that I think people really like. If aliens created us and they seeded mankind and we can evolve like them. I mean, after all, if they created us, that means that one day we'll be like them. There's this whole evolution possibility thing. There's a total disregard of God, if that's in the minds of most of people when they think of this. And I think that plays a role, because I think that people naturally don't want God. Honestly, I think that they just don't want him as a natural part of our hearts, and we want to be our own kings. And I think as a result of that, we jump on things uncritically when they fall in that category. Now, in terms of who this is coming from and all that kind of stuff, I have a conspiratorial view. I think that Sitchin, particularly, now I want to say clearly, I'm sort of deviating with what Dr. Michael Heiser, who was in the film, would say about this, who has sitchiniswrong.com, which details the errors of Sitchin. I think that Sitchin's errors, and in addition to a lot of other things, I just don't see how he could be doing this in any way just messed up. I mean, it's deliberate stuff. There's been in conspiracy lore for a long time the idea that Sitchin was a part of this, like he was at these Bohemian Grove type ritual situations. There's been reports from, multiples and stuff. I mean, they're unhealed multiples, and therefore their testimony is suspect for lots of different reasons. But there's lots of different things about that and Sitchin that I just have always, based on the way that the information that he presented in the 70s and 80s when he knew nobody could check his facts, he knew he could never get busted with this. That's the thing. That is, he could just say it like it was true, and the person had to either believe it or not believe it, and that's all they could do. Because nowadays, we can see the Sumerian text for ourselves. We can see the Sumerian dictionaries that they created. It's not a question anymore. He was wrong. But the way that he presented that, and he had to know it was wrong. So there's other people around that have dealt with him that have said similar things in terms of I don't want to get into too much of that, but at the end of the day, I think it's something big. It doesn't have to be part of some grand deception, or whatever that's being planned. I don't think it has to be a big thing, but I think it's just one of many things. I think it's just one of many things that do the same kind of thing. Obviously, I think that as truth movement people, we've studied stuff like the Bohemian Grove, and we know that these people are occultists and Satanists, like theistic Satanists. They believe Satan is real, and they believe that they're setting up a kingdom for the Antichrist. Like, they believe that. And we always say, as good truthers, oh, well, they believe that. We might not believe it, but they really believe it. But as I started thinking about this, of course it would make sense that there is specifically targeted disinformation that sounds really good and true. If these people really are Satanists, why should we be surprised that they're anti-Christian on every turn? But that's, again, I know I'm going to get all kinds of heat for this, but I mean, that's what I think is happening. But and I have backtracked a little in terms of that I think it's all part of some huge thing that's coming. It may or may not be, but I do know it seems to be targeted in that way.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, we can't see what the behind-the-scenes workings are of this agenda, or who's behind it, but we can at least guess at it, and it certainly does seem to play into a greater agenda, which, as you say, has a lot of different serves a lot of different purposes at the same time. So again, it might not be coordinated or planned out, but it just happens to serve the greater agenda. So that's maybe one reason why it's popping up so much. And I remember probably my first exposure to this was back when I was watching Star Trek: The Next Generation as a young kid, and loved that series. And of course, one of their episodes was about how we were seeded by this ancient alien race that seeded all the various races in the galaxy. And I thought, oh, that's kind of a bizarre idea. And lo and behold, here we are, and it's in so many different pieces of fiction. That is it an idea that they're just picking up on? Is there some coordinated agenda? Well, again, we have to venture into speculation to a certain extent when it comes to that. But let's turn.
One other thing I'd say about that is that there's just one other aspect to it, is this idea of evolution, the coming evolution. You can make all kinds of good and just regular theories about that being pushed, whatever that means to them or whatever. This idea that we can become evolved, that an evolution is coming, whether it's in 2012 or the next year, or the next year, or the next year. That's a thing that's just like it. That's bigger than the ancient aliens thing. The thing that we're getting sold on every possible angle, that we're due for an evolution right around the corner. And the ancient aliens theory is a cog in that machinery. And that's what we need to start kind of thinking about. What is that about? Why would they care about us believing that we're on the verge of a coming evolution? And I think that's where the real philosophical work gets done in the conspiracy world. Granted, I know my theories are probably out there and all this stuff. I don't want anybody to just necessarily subscribe to everything I'm saying. But of course, I think it's a good place to start digging around and picking around.
Absolutely, very fruitful line of research, and the apotheosis of man, and all of that kind of stuff embedded in so many different works of pop culture. Again, so absolutely, I think you're right. That is kind of the meta level of that idea that's being pushed. But let's step back for a moment, because for better or worse, you've become known for some of your debunkumentaries. You do a lot of other work besides, but this is something that's well known in the truth movement at any rate. And I think it is a valuable thing to do. I think there's a lot of valuable content that can be garnered from this, especially when it is done in such a straightforward, factual, analytical way as you do. I think you really destroy a lot of the targets that you're going after through just showing them to be self-contradictory, etc. And it's a very effective method. But one of the ones that I like especially is that Zeitgeist challenge that you mentioned earlier, because I myself, of course, have had my dealings with the Zeitgeistians, who like to hold themselves up as paragons of rationality, and anyone who doesn't believe what they believe is clearly just irrational beings or whatever. And yet, when confronted by this challenge that you proposed, you were offering $1,000 money, to cold hard cash, to anyone who can simply prove the claims made in the first part of part 1 of Zeitgeist, and no one has so far come forward to actually accept that challenge. That has to speak volumes to the people out there, and they can try to justify it in all sorts of ways. But at any rate, let's just talk a little bit about that Zeitgeist challenge and what claims you're asking people to source.
Sure. Well, the Zeitgeist challenge. One thing that I think will give a great background on this is a video that I did recently for a conference called Zeitgeist History Rewritten. And that was, I think, important for this discussion because it gives the history of where this theory came about. And it came about in the 1700s. It's a really, really new theory. The idea, of course, is that Jesus was just like Horus or Attis or Krishna or Dionysus or Mithra, and that they all were, born on December 25th. They had 12 followers, they died, they resurrected 3 days later. All these kind of very specific claims that they say, oh yeah, Horus did that, Attis did that, Krishna did that. But the problem was that this wasn't something, when this came out about in the 1700s and really blossomed around the 1800s and so on, it was just like Sitchin. Nobody could check their facts. I mean, nobody had like English translations of the Egyptian text. The Rosetta Stone was discovered in 1899 or something like that. So nobody could do anything about it. You just had to uncritically believe it. And again, people wanted to believe it. It's like, oh, we don't have to deal with that anymore. Let's get rid of that. And so it just became this huge thing. But it died out as people started coming forward. And it's like, no, Horus wasn't crucified. No, Krishna was not born of a virgin. He was had 7 brothers before him. All the stuff that the scholars of those religions themselves saying, I don't know where this, like Kersey Graves' 16 Crucified Saviors and all this stuff. But I love the Zeitgeist History Rewritten PowerPoint because it shows you that where this came from and their bias, and they were occultists and Freemasons and people that had a specific anti-Christian agenda that started this, that wrote these books that informed entirely Zeitgeist's big list of references and so on. So anyway, my point in all that is, I guess, that the Zeitgeist Challenge is something that was shining light on something that had been debunked a long time ago, but with YouTube and music in the background and cool animations, a whole group of people got back on board. And so at the end of the day, whether or not people believe what I believe, it's so important for us to realize that one thing, that when we have a desire, when we have a motive, we'll believe anything. And so we got to check ourselves about the information that we get. I discovered in my journey that the disinformation, the bad stuff, was all anti-Christian. All the stuff that I could be like, what? Who would believe that? That was all really anti-Christian. That's the journey that I went on. It's like, why are they anti-Christian? So I didn't do this stuff because I was a Christian and I wanted to make everybody Christian. I did this stuff initially because I was a truther and I wanted the truthers to not believe lies. And it just so happened that all the lies were anti-Christian, and that led to a whole different place. But I'm just asking people to be more critical. The Zeitgeist Challenge is still out there, zeitgeistchallenge.com. If anybody seriously has a serious submission, I really will entertain it. Just read the rules there, the front page of zeitgeistchallenge.com. And I think it's zeitgeistchallenge.com. It's still up there. You can just hit the contact button and you'll get me.
Don't worry, I will start referring some of the Zeitgeistians who get in contact with me from time to time to that webpage, and I will invite them to participate in the Zeitgeist Challenge. Well, let's talk about the concept, the art, the process of debunking. This is something that obviously you've been involved in for years now. You've created quite a few documentaries now that have gone through this process. Tell us in your own words, what is the value of this? What are you attempting to achieve through these debunkumentaries?
I think it's obviously the truth. Most of the time when I go into a certain claim, I'm not sure what the truth is yet. I mean, they're very specific, difficult claims. That's how all this stuff works. It blinds you with science. You don't know the answer to that. You don't know what the Andromeda cluster does and blah, 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 or whatever. So the process is kind of a fun one because in the way that I think of it is you just learn. You just learn about that issue like nobody's business. And at the end of you're not really even thinking about the claim at that point, but more often times than not, once you come out of like really understanding a subject, the thing that somebody said about it is obviously, why it's obviously wrong. But it's really important. In fact, it's like really a part of our history is debunking and refutations of false things. There's always been this kind of things. And some of the earliest writings that we have are people that were debunking just wrong theories and things like that. So it's something that has a rich history. But I think what I learned early on with it is that I would get kind of frustrated with people like Jordan Maxwell and stuff like that. And I had a lot of spite in my voice and in what I wanted to do there. And I think over the years, I just had more compassion on people as I saw more of the stuff because I saw how easy it was to fall for. And so if I would say to anybody about debunking, the most important thing is not so much what you do, but it's the desire to help the people, the compassion for them, and just take all the cheap shots out of your script.
Exactly right. I think you're not going to win an argument by going down to the lowest common denominator. So that is something that I hope people out there will take to heart. And you got to rise above, I think, the mud that people sling in these debates and stick to what the facts are. All right, time flies. We're already up against our final break. So let's take one more break and we'll come back after this to wrap things up. Once again, talking tonight to Chris White of ancientaliensdebunked.com. And he has a lot of other work that we'll tell you about after the break. So stay tuned right there. We'll be right back.
One day in Manhattan.
All right, friends, welcome back to the closing minutes of tonight's edition of Corbett Report Radio. Once again, this is Corbett Report Radio, and we've been talking to Chris White of ancientaliensdebunked.com. Once again, that video is completely there for free with all the resources associated with it. I hope you will go check it out. Once again, the link will be in tonight's show notes in case you happen to miss it. And if you do appreciate the work, I hope you'll go and spread it to others, because that's the only way we'll be able to move forward in defeating some of the well-funded propaganda from the History Channel and others who are pushing some of these ideas. But Chris, we've been talking specifically about Ancient Aliens Debunked tonight, but of course you have a lot of other work on a lot of other subjects. Let's talk a little bit about some of the other work that you do.
Sure. Well, there's a lot of different things. You can go to the main kind of podcast website, which is nowheretorunradio.com or conspiracyclose.com, goes to the same place. It's all over the board, really. I don't know exactly what to promote specifically, other than I would just say the podcast. And one thing is that I've been really interested in sending out these DVDs. They're like 8 gigabytes of just stuff that I think is important, audio, video. It's totally free, no obligation, no nothing. I think that if I was going to promote anything, it would be that. I'm calling it the Christianity 101 DVDs, but it's just a lot of stuff that I think is important. You can get it on that website. Just go there and hit you can go to chriswhiteministries.com too. I think that's a good place to get it. Anyway, that, and I think really the other stuff, Zeitgeist Challenge we mentioned, the Revelations Radio Network. I do a lot of stuff about the Bible as well. The main thing, I guess, is like you said, the sharing of this stuff through Twitter and Facebook, the Ancient Aliens Debunked movie specifically. And I wanted to mention just real quickly some of the other issues on the on that site. or on that movie, because you can watch these individually. It's a 3-hour film, so it's like, you can't take it all in one sitting sometimes. But in case anybody's interested in any of these topics, Puma Punku, which is a thing in Bolivia, the pyramids, Baalbek, Incan sites, Easter Island, Pakal's rocket, this idea that, I won't have time to go into it, but the Nazca lines, the Tolima fighter jets, as we mentioned, the so-called Egyptian light bulb, UFOs and ancient art, the crystal skulls, Ezekiel's wheel, the idea of ancient nuclear warfare, Vimanas, and of course the Anunnaki and the Nephilim, and other things like some figurines and stuff that were there as well. So you can watch all those individually at the site. And like I said, please share Facebook, Twitter, or whatever. That's really, I think, the best thing, is that if you know somebody in your family or friends that believe this particular theory, share it on your Facebook or whatever with them. And that's why I made this. That's why I made 252 footnotes to the various places where people can find the answers to this, is so that for people to use it as a tool for those people in their lives that believe this particular theory.
And to be sure, you have no monetary interest in promoting this? There's no way of making money out of this?
Not even a possibility of me making money with this film. I did that for a few different reasons. One is that just a lot of the criticism, people say on my podcast that I take donations or whatever, and that's okay. But I didn't want anybody to have anything to say like this. I just didn't want any of the baggage that goes along with that, with money for this project.
Excellent. Well, it's good to see this information out there, and as you say, it's broken down in so many ways, transcripts, different sections, all of it linked up there at ancientaliensdebunked.com, so we'll leave it there for tonight's conversation. Once again, I hope you'll go and check out Chris White's work, and it will be linked up in the show notes for tonight's episode at corbettreport.com in case you missed it. So Chris White, thank you so much for coming on the program tonight.
James, it's a pleasure to be on the show.
All right, excellent. We'll leave it there, but of course I will be back with you all tomorrow night, 23 hours from now, so I hope you'll be there to join me as we continue this Corbett Report Radio open source exploration of the truth behind the headlines. So until then, thank you all for listening, and take care.